Here we are again to talk aviation, and if you listen real carefully, you might hear the cicadas in the background. Anytime's a good time to talk aviation, and stop press, Martin. Stop the press. For quite a few programs, we've talked about possible A380 customers, new ones. We've mentioned Turkish. You know, when we mention something, it usually happens.
Certainly seems that way.
Uncanny.
Yeah. So it looks like Turkey are out to wet lease 2 A380s. Looks like they're getting them from Malaysian Airlines, which has also been a rumour for a while that Malaysian wants to drop some of their A380s. What Turkish want are 2 wet-leased A380s and the guarantee of a third within 10 hours should one of the ones that they've got goes unserviceable.
Right.
And this is very similar to what they did with the 777s. Before they purchased their last batch of 777s, they wet-leased a couple from Jet Airways.
Try them out.
Yeah, just to try them out.
So what's it going to be?
Sydney?
You reckon?
Well, it's been talked of in the past, and there is quite a large Turkish population in Sydney and Melbourne. So,
And it's an A380 base.
A380 base.
Interesting, huh?
Very interesting, yeah. That'll be another one-stop to Europe flight via Turkey. Not bad.
On an A380, premium equipment, Emirates too.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we go. So that through just this week. Interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. Now to the TransAsia crash, flight 235, wasn't it? In Taiwan, we saw that extraordinary video from the dash camera in the previous program a fortnight ago. Now we know that, oh dear, 2 engines lost power, only 1 flamed out. So what happened?
Yeah, it appears they shut down the wrong one. It was the right engine that had the warning, seemed to have failed, and they shut the left one down.
Oh dear.
And they were about 1,000 feet up.
Now, this is not the first crash, is it?
No,
this airline's had. There was one involving an ATR 72 back in July last year.
Yep.
Looks as if there could be some issues with pilot training and proficiency.
Well, they have grounded, I think, 28 of their pilots.
Oh dear.
Sent them off for refresher training.
Am I to understand that there is a lot of pressure on airlines operating in that particular country, or that island of Taiwan, that really makes them depart no matter what? There are big fines to be had for delaying passengers, and the ethos is go at all costs.
Yes, apparently the fines for being late are quite draconian, and they're levied by the government. So it does appear that they'll do anything to get off the ground.
Have we any information about how they could have made that mistake? Because I remember back to that British Midland Kegworth crash, 737-400 if I remember rightly, where they shut down the wrong engine because the vibration indicator had been wired back to front. And they thought it was the right engine instead of the left, or it may have been the other way around. Is there any talk of that here?
No, at this point, nothing's come out about what might have caused them to do it. Could have just been error.
Oh, it's just sad when that happens, isn't it? How can the airline maintain its operation with so many pilots?
Well, I guess it's pretty doubtful that they will now. That might be the end of them.
They operate some big jets too, I think, don't they?
Currently in service, 22 planes. They're going to have 26 to 29 in service in a few years. They're one of the early orders of the A330-800 Neo. They've ordered 4 of those. They already operate 2 A330-300s. They've got a whole bunch of Airbus narrowbodies, A320s, A321s. They've ordered the A321 Neo, 12 of those.
There you go.
So, yeah, they're a reasonable sized, as small airlines go, they're reasonable sized.
There'll be something at some point soon from the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, that will pretty well definitively tell us whether there was a technical fault or it was a pilot error.
Certainly, it seems to be something they could have flown away from, if you'd had the right engine going.
Right. Now, we talk about, the Airbus Boeing thing all the time, obviously. And the fascinating thing recently, in recent time, has been the rise of the Airbus narrowbody and the different versions of really what started out as the A320. Who would have thought, and I'm going back to 2003, I think, when I first flew on an A321, US Air from LA to Charlotte, I think, the base of that airline back then, that, nearly 15 years later, would see the actual start of its sales success.
Yes, it's really...
I mean, that's amazing.
It's really taking off, yeah. Airbus are forecasting that in the near future, 35% of all their narrow-body sales will be A321s.
35%?
So over a third.
And up till this point, it's only really just been a bit of a niche part of the A320 sort of picture.
Yes, it was a useful plane to have in your portfolio, but they weren't selling a whole lot of them.
And it's the Neo, isn't it? It's this new engine.
Yeah, well, they're going to take away all the sales in that segment because it's the only plane in town.
If this segment of the market is still viable and, you pay a lot, I guess, for a brand new A321neo, think of those, I think there's still 800 75s in the world still flying. There's a lot of height under those wings. I wonder if it'll be worth doing a re-engineering of the 75 using geared turbofan.
Well, there was a lot of talk about that late last week, earlier this week. There was a rumour that Boeing were considering re-engineering the 757. They've subsequently come out and denied all talk of that, and there's been some interesting analysis on the web comparing a re-engined 757 versus the new A321neo Long Ranger. And no matter what you do to the old 757, there's no way you can bring it up to parity with the new A321 simply because it's just a heavier airframe.
Yeah. But still, the low cost of the frame.
Well, the trouble is with new engines is, despite what most people probably think, they're actually heavier than old engines.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah, they have...
So structural pylon issues.
Yes, wing and structural pylon issues. And the trouble with that is so let's say Boeing went ahead and re-engined the 757. So you'd have 70s technology plane. Yeah, you could tart it all up and modernize it. But fundamentally, the structure...
Yes.
Because you can't re-engineer the structure without going through type certification again. So...
Which is expensive and time-consuming.
You might as well build a new plane, right? So that leaves the door open for Airbus. If Boeing were to go ahead with a 757 MAX, Airbus would have the A321neo. Well, there's nothing stopping Airbus inserting a few more frames into that fuselage and a new wing, and then they own that whole segment again.
Yeah.
And they've just got to announce that they're thinking of that. It would kill the 757.
So it's a bit of a pipe dream.
Yeah, and don't forget, Boeing's still got $30 billion and counting of money to make up on the 787 program.
Yeah, divide that into individual airframes. Is it more than they can actually sell? Is that a bigger debt?
Well, it is
than the units they can sell.
It is a lot because they're actually, according to most reports, they're not making money on the ones they're selling now. Because don't forget, the 787 was sold on the basis that it was only going to take 3 days to assemble and all this. Well, none of that's happened.
No.
And so every plane they're selling is adding to that $30 billion.
They are getting them out the door pretty quick, though, now.
They have to get them out of the door pretty quickly. But, yeah, the way they account for their program costs is quite interesting. So they got this, $30 billion balloon payment sitting on the end of the program, which is not going down. In fact, it's gone up $4 billion since September.
Oh, dear. Is there any end in sight?
I'm sure they'll work it out. But, yeah, it's an interesting predicament to be in.
Speaking of selling airplanes, a visit from the RAAF in a C-17 in the last few days at Wellington, dropping off some sandstone for the World War I memorial area in Wellington. And a good opportunity for the chaps and the politicians to have a look over it. I remember going to Long Beach a long time ago and seeing or getting some glimpses of the production facility there when it was in full swing. So, a dozen or so brand new ones out on the lot and others being towed in for painting, etc. Big operation, the old McDonnell Douglas works at Long Beach. Now, they're about $300 million US a machine.
Yes.
All kitted out, and the support for them is not cheap either. We've talked about this before. I know they're going to be impressed, or that they were impressed by what it could do. Apparently there was a tactical approach into Wellington, 60-degree angle.
Oh, wow.
With the chaps and the pollies inside. They would have loved that.
Yeah.
But, it's too much plane.
I certainly think
NZ.
it is. I think it is.
It's not tactical enough to be of the real use that we have to be able to get from these things, I know it does well on dirt fields, and I've seen them landing it in Arizona on the desert and all that sort of thing, but we're talking about very tight, like we've discussed before, Pacific atolls, stuff cleared out of the bush of New Zealand potentially, that sort of thing. You need something that can use those,
and I also wonder,
operate in those environments, and I don't think the C-17 is it.
And would it be worth New Zealand putting in the investment in the staff and facilities to keep them operational? If New Zealand got a couple of them, they might as well just farm that out to Australia, which, again, doesn't actually get New Zealand any capability.
Exactly.
They get the use of a plane, but all the associated work, which is actually quite a good skills-building process for a country. If that's all happening just north of of Brisbane, I think the C-17s are based there, what's the point?
And for not much more money, you'd be going to another level. We've talked about it before, I'll say it again. I mean, the Hercs I think they're 50s design, and you can modernise them and all of that. But fundamentally, it's sort of like we were talking 757 versus A321. We need to go to something new now, and it's got to be the A400. It's got to be.
Well, yeah.
If you're going to go somewhere new, that's the one.
A400, probably also very expensive, and you obviously...
And the C390.
In fact, that's scheduled to be slightly cheaper than a Hercules C-130J.
Well, there you go. You know, I think we've mentioned before the mix, you know, maybe 5 A400s and the same amount of 390s.
Yeah.
And you probably get those for the price of 3 or 4
Well,
C-17s.
Of course, the trouble, or not the trouble, I think the carrot that's being dangled is I think there are 7 C-17s that haven't yet been sold.
The whitetail ones.
Yeah, whitetails ones sitting in the yard in Long
So they want
Beach.
to shuffle them off.
So I think the Canadians and the Poms might take a couple, but if there's 2 or 3 left over, you might find those would be the ones heading down to New Zealand, and who knows what they'd really pay for them. You know, we might not end up paying that much for them.
Look, if it's a great deal, I'm all for it. But if we're going to spend the money, we need to get what's right.
There again, the decision-making process in matters defence-related here tends to drag on for a long, long time. Those planes won't sit there forever. So if it's going to happen, we're probably going to hear about it happening in the next 3 to 4 months.
Well, I suppose, you know, anyone would be interested to go for a flight in a C-17, but it sounds like they're working towards it.
Well, how else are you going to get sandstone from Australia? Oh, yeah, ships. I keep forgetting about ships.
No, you set up a mission that looks like you're just taking sandstone somewhere, but actually it's a sales call.
Yeah, that's all it was, yeah.
And what you say is, see, we can lift 50 tons with this thing.
Yeah, yeah. And,
They all go,
we're bringing you
"Wow."
sandstone for free.
And come for a ride, we'll do a 60-degree angle tactical approach, and you'll lose your tummy and go, wow.
Well, I wish they'd announced that. It would have been worth going and watching that, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say in the news reports. I wasn't there. It's not the first time C-17's been to Welly. I think a US Air Force one called in a while back. In fact, a bit of video exists, and for the YouTube watchers, we'll put that.
But it would have been good to go and to watch a tactical approach. Now, interesting about the C-17, the engines on the C-17, I think they're called C-34s.
Right.
I think so. There's talk of them being put onto the old B-52.
Oh, are you kidding me?
Yeah, because the B-52 is scheduled to remain in service until 2045 at current projections.
So they're flying the H models. I think the last one came off in like 62.
There you go.
How old is that?
So to be coming up for 100 years old. Well, B-52 service would have then been over 100 years, but the frames would be 80 to 90 years old.
Incredible.
With 4 new General Electric engines on them, higher, faster, 40% less fuel, and apparently the major cost saving is in the amount of money that the US now spends in tanker aircraft.
What, to refuel them?
To refuel them, because tanker fuel costs 7 to 9 times more than fuel on the ground, once you factored in the cost of the planes carrying it and everything.
Right.
And also, in order to operate them from places like Guam and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, they have to tanker fuel in ships. And they wouldn't have to do that either,
That's expensive,
or much less.
obviously. Yeah.
Yes, and they're also putting it forward as a sort of all-in-one platform, sort of a B-52-based strike force. So you'll have B-52s dropping off intelligent cruise missiles, and you'll have other B-52s controlling those cruise missiles in real time.
So like a universal platform.
Yeah.
That's incredible that the airframe is still viable.
Well, it's built old school. It doesn't wear out much.
Okay, is that the key to it, is it?
Yeah, it seems to be just constantly repairable.
Anything else happening in the world of military?
Well, yes, interestingly enough, Argentina have just taken delivery of, I think, 10 or 12. It's a Pakistani-Chinese co-production.
Pakistani-Chinese co-production?
Yeah,
What is this?
the Pakistanis call it the JF-10, and the Chinese call it the FC-1 Rolling Thunder, I believe.
Rolling Thunder.
But it looks a bit like an F-16 with side intakes.
Right.
And it's really a MiG-21 taken to the nth degree.
Okay, like pimped out.
Yeah. It looks pretty flash, actually. You know, it's fly-by-wire, same engine that the MiG-29 has in it, but only one of them. And, of course, the English are all a bit worried now, because this is a strike fighter which is quite capable of reaching the Falklands from Argentine.
Herein lies the problem.
Yes, herein lies the problem. Yeah, and if you look at it in plan form, it looks very similar to an F-16. And the interesting thing is, you know, on a Mirage that had the side intakes, it had that spike which moved in and out.
That's right.
Right? About 10, 15 years ago, if you followed NASA, you'd have seen that they were working on an F-16. So you know how the F-16, the chin intake's got a splitter plate?
Yeah.
Well, they tried to do away with the splitter plate because it causes quite a bit of aerodynamic drag by putting a aerodynamic bump in front of the intake that perform the same role as the splitter,
Right.
or in the Mirage's case as the cone. Well, that's what the Chinese have on this fighter. Yeah, they've got these aerodynamically shaped bumps.
It
Quite a
sort
good-
of looks like a Mirage more than anything else, doesn't
From the side, it looks like a Mirage, and in plan, it looks quite similar to an F-16.
it? I thought the Argentinians were basically broke.
Yeah, you'd think that. Well,
These must have been cheap, huh?
they are very cheap. Apparently, they're like $15 million.
But they do the trick.
They certainly do the trick.
Back here, Martin, I see the last of the air services to be exited by Air New Zealand has been filled or filled up, refilled, whatever the word is. That's the Kai service, and I see Great Barrier Air are going to be flying that with Cessna Caravan aircraft.
Yep.
So that was a bit of a fuss about nothing in the end, wasn't it, the whole thing?
Yeah, and they've also gone to a flat fee pricing, haven't they? I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's $180 each way.
Right, okay.
So no negotiation, no inexplicable price rises 10 minutes after you check the price and going to book it and all this
Yes,
type of thing.
You know what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Cessna Caravan, so that's probably what, about maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes up to Kaitaia from Auckland.
Yeah.
Not too bad, and a very capable aircraft. So that's Kaitaia sorted with Great Barrier, Whakatane with Chatham's Air, and it looks like the others are mopped up by Sounds Air with their PC-12. There
Yeah.
you go. Didn't take very long at all.
Didn't take long at all, no.
Bit of a storm in a teacup, perhaps, that whole reaction to that. I've said in the past, with the 75th anniversary of Air New Zealand, there should be some sort of retrojet, Martin, to,
Yep.
just acknowledge a wee bit of the past, which, had a lot to do with where they are now. In a way, a story of New Zealand as well, with Teal and NAC and all of that. And I see that Lufthansa have done just that. They have rolled out, is it their last 748?
I believe it is.
In the colours of their first 747-100, rolled out in March 1970, I think. And I think that livery was launched with their first 747 back in the day in 1970. And you know what? It looks fantastic.
It does, doesn't
looks
it?
So good.
Yeah, it does. The stalk on the tail looks really, really great, and I love the line along the windows.
We don't see that much anymore. It's like a graphic style of airline livery that's sort of gone.
It doesn't look aged, does it? It doesn't
No.
look out of place at all.
It looks classic and sort of timeless.
Yeah. Classic and timeless.
No polished steel belly, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, because that would have just been the cherry on the top, eh?
And I think they can do that because they're still made of metal, aren't they, down there?
I'm not sure around the wing fairing and all that. Probably gets pretty ugly now. There's probably much more fiberglass stuff.
Right, okay. But they used
But
to
I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to find out.
They've always had quite a large wing body fairing, clip-on fairing.
Yeah. I just wonder if the front of the wing now, if that's not all plastic.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
But they sort of have that slightly metallic-looking grey paint, so
Yeah.
it slightly simulates it. But it does look good. And it, again, just makes me, wish that we could see something...
So what would you go for in an Air New Zealand plane?
I'd go for the teal livery that the DC-8s were delivered in.
And so what did that have written on the side?
It had Air New Zealand on the main fuselage with, of course, the flying fish,
Yeah.
the gold flying fish, and the very tealy green
I think if
strip down the windows,
if-
like we've just been talking about.
the Air New Zealand logo was prominent enough, I don't think that would... Because I can guarantee what they're upset about is whether that would dilute the brand.
Yeah, but that's crazy, because if you look at other opportunities that airlines have had to do this, I think it was Thai did a 747-400 in their late 60s, early 70s livery. Now, you'd have to squint to see the word Thai. That's what we're talking about.
That'd be fine, wouldn't it?
Look great.
It would look great. And
It's-
they should do a local Airbus in NAC livery.
Well, that's right. And there's 3 liveries to choose from. Well, 2 NAC liveries to choose from, and then the Air New Zealand 80s livery that went on the domestic fleet. I just think it shows a slight lack of imagination. And you can bet when that aircraft lands in Germany and people see it flying around the world, it'll bring back all sorts of memories.
Yeah.
Of
Well,
of a different era and warm fuzzies.
when I was in Scandinavia not long ago, we parked next to an A321, I believe it was, in the SAS retro
Yeah.
livery. That looked fantastic.
And Lufthansa, they have a retro, the scheme before that. The 707s were delivered in A321, which looks fantastic as well. You can imagine the 777-300ER or the Dreamliner in that retro livery. It would look smart, wouldn't it?
It would look very nice, yeah.
It's a pity.
Well,
Are you listening?
yeah.
No. It's like I woke up and no one was there. One thing I've noticed, Martin, is everyone who has A340-600s, and I think it is Thai that is the latest,
Yep.
is now starting to sort of offload them,
Get rid of them.
but not everyone.
No, SAA just come to an agreement to keep theirs for a few extra years. They've renegotiated all their leases, dropping a few unprofitable routes, but they're keeping 8 A340s running, and it's going to save them $200 million a year.
Those 600s.
Yes.
There doesn't seem to be much future for those aircraft, so I guess it's easy to wring out a good deal.
It's easy to wring out a good deal, especially now that Airbus has come to the party with the engine manufacturers to guarantee that the costs of maintaining and running them will be no higher, apart from fuel, perhaps, than a twin-engined airliner.
Right, so there's
of
no
the same
need to
class.
panic and run off and...
Yep.
Oh, okay, so does that show that SAA is becoming a little more stable now?
Seems to be they're turning the corner. They've cancelled 10 A320 narrow bodies, are going to get 5 A330s instead, and they're going to concentrate on their profitable routes and ditch all their
wouldn't you?
unprofitable ones. Yeah, interesting concept that.
Yeah, that's
It's funny.
that's a great idea.
Apparently it works. I don't know.
Why didn't anyone think of that
No,
before?
It's funny, eh?
We got a question through our YouTube channel from somebody wanting to know what happened to ZK-NBV, one of Air New Zealand's 74s. I think it was the last one delivered to them that they actually ordered. It had GE engines. The common perception is, Martin, they all went to the desert and got made into something else. I see that NBV is now in the colours of Saudi Airlines, which is interesting, very topical, but is in fact now owned by a Spanish company who are an airline operating in their own right as well.
Wamos.
Wamos.
Sounds like they couldn't get the V for Vamos.
Quite a striking font style and
Yeah.
colour. They have got NBV, but they've leased it out to the Saudis. It has the cross sword thing on the tail and the titles, not the deserty colour that they usually have. That's what happened to NBV. There you go. Before we talk about the aircraft of the day, which is going to be a fighter jet, that guy Ralph Nader has been having a go at United Airlines.
Yes, he has.
He's tweeted or published a letter that he sent to them. Some people are with him. Some people think he's just a complainer.
Yeah, well, Ralph Nader's, very polarizing.
Yeah.
So he'll always get it in the neck.
Consumer advocate.
He's having a go at United Airlines for their incessant outsourcing.
Ah.
Yeah,
He's really accusing them of being
greedy.
and unpatriotic.
That's always the funny thing about America, isn't it? On the one hand, they're selling this warm, fuzzy, patriotic feeling that we're the best. On the other hand, they're doing everything they can to extract every cent that they can out of the people that run the airline and instead give it to the shareholders.
Exactly. And themselves, the management
Yeah.
and the shareholders.
Yeah.
And not only that, they're squeezing their low-paid employees
Yeah.
basically into work pools that aren't directly operated by the
Yeah.
airline.
And, 0-hour contracts, all this type of thing.
Exactly. 24/7, doesn't matter what time of the
Yeah.
day, night, season of the year, it's the same. It never changes. It's bottom dollar. Now, if you were a passenger on a plane and you were aware of that happening behind the scenes, you would worry about things like safety and attention to detail and commitment to the job. wouldn't
Well, having sat in the back of a fair few United aircraft, I don't really think they worry about attention to detail or quality at all, ever. That was shocking. And a further
you?
reason to get a bit
There goes that then.
Yeah, a further reason to get a bit upset with United is that by rejigging the seats in their 777 fleet, they've added the equivalent of a 747-400's worth of capacity to the fleet.
Gosh.
What you'll find, though, is the way they keep the safety standard up, or at least absolve themselves of ultimate responsibility for the safety standard, is they then outsource the safety bits to another company that they can then blame.
Then you can blame them. All right, aircraft of the day. We had cuts on the program last year, one of the episodes of the guy who designed this aircraft. It's probably one of the most recognisable fighter aircraft around.
And we're seeing a lot of it lately.
Because they're the planes that are attacking the evildoers.
Yeah, the evildoers.
And we're talking about the F-16, the General Dynamics. Who did General Dynamics become? Did they fold it into Lockheed?
Yeah, it became Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So the F-16, it's a very small plane, but it's a great performer. I've seen the US Air Force team, Thunderbirds, with their F-16s. Amazing what they can do with those little aircraft.
January 1974.
Is that right?
That's how long they've been around.
The designer I was mentioning was Pierre Spray. There's obviously a few of them involved in the plane. But what was the thinking behind the F-16?
a lightweight combat fighter to get back from the enormous amounts of money they'd spent on planes which were perceived as not being that good, for example, the F-14 and all that type of thing.
Right.
So it was meant to be light, cheap to build, and effective.
And it was.
And it was and still is.
They've made thousands of them.
4,500 roughly.
That's incredible. I remember going to David Montham Air Force Base and seeing the early A models mothballed. I think I counted over 200 of them.
Yeah, F-16As.
Yep.
They're in service with over 25 countries around the world, and the capabilities just got massively better. You know, they've got conformal fuel tanks now that almost double the fuel capacity. They've got that enlarged spine that goes down the back,
Yes.
which is chock full of electronics. I mean, when that thing's loaded up, you can't believe it can fly because
No,
you
it's
can hardly
amazing
see the bottom of the wing.
What they can put on the wing.
The seat is canted because when you sit in the seat, it leans back quite a long way. And there was all talk about that being in order to help the pilot handle higher Gs and all this. No, it turns out it was a mistake, that when the prototype came off, the cockpit bubble was too small and the floor wasn't at the level they'd anticipated. Quite knows how that happened.
Right.
But in the 70s, programs were often rushed along. So the only way they could get the seat in without the pilot's head hitting the top of the canopy was to lean the seat back.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they all do look slightly reclined.
They are slightly reclined, and apparently it's very comfortable. It's a side stick controller. For the time, it was a very advanced fly-by-wire system with absolutely no stability, aerodynamic stability in the plane at all. Very effective aircraft. And it won the contest for the lightweight fighter against the YF-17, which, of course, once it had been enlarged by about 20%, became the F-18.
Right.
Mm.
So it's seen combat, in the first Gulf War?
Yeah.
It wasn't in time for Vietnam.
No.
And it seems to be the aircraft of choice for the nations involved in the effort in the Middle East now. Jordan.
Egypt. Everyone has them.
We were going to have them, you know.
Yeah, New Zealand nearly had them, didn't they?
We
Didn't
had
you?
some ready to go.
And what happened?
The Labour Party was elected to government in, 1999, 2000, and they decided we didn't need a fighter wing anymore.
So when the plane was called into existence, the RFP requested an aircraft that weighed less than 20,000 pounds, which is just over 9 tons.
Right.
The most current version of the plane, interestingly enough, is actually still 8,570 kilograms empty, 12,000 kilograms loaded.
Gee.
The maximum takeoff weight then with fuel, it's 20 tons. It's 19,200. So it's more than doubles its weight.
That's amazing.
So from empty to maximum takeoff weight, it's double.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just shows you the progression of a design through quite a period of time.
Yeah. The production line is in the process of shutting down.
Right.
Although it is active in a few fighter campaigns to see if they can eke a bit more out of it. There's a Japanese version. It's a Kawasaki something, but it's basically an F-16. And there's a Korean plane which looks suspiciously similar to an F-16 as well.
So our aircraft of the day has been the F-16. What could have been here, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's our program for another fortnight. Paul Brennan here in Wellington, and
Martin Noakes in Wellington.
we'll see you again soon.
Cheers.